Who's that? Okay, I want to mention that we have with us Secretary of State, and Ministry of Industry, Science and Technology Innovation of Cambodia, my very dear friend, Dr. Hong Sokong, who I had the good fortune of being knighted with together in the Philippines under Philippine Act of Parliament 646. He's not going to be speaking today, but I'm happy to say that he's with us. His Excellency is with us today. He has participated in previous discussions with us. We also have some 300 people, including about 40 foreign governments who are going to be with us. And I want to welcome whoever was able to sign on before we cut off registration. We were at maximum capacity that was allowed by the carrier, and I'm happy to be here. Before I introduce all of the speakers, I would like to talk about a very dear friend of mine who will co-MC with me today. Is Dr. David Boxbaum, who has very kindly, together with his firm, analyzed the IPR sections of 3 multilateral agreements, trade agreements, and 1 bilateral trade agreement. And he will be talking about, giving us a description of the difference in the IPR sections a little later today. The list he will be providing later, and we'll take it from there. And of course, Ben Jacobs from U.S. Chamber will be speaking during that session. We will have 2 sections. The first session will involve trade and the importance of trade. Second session is going to involve IPR discussions. I am going to lead the discussion on the trade part. And then after that, you won't hear from me. You will hear only from Dr. David Boxbaum, who is a legend here in China. He's been here 48 years practicing law. He has influenced many, many legislations that have been passed by the Chinese government. He has done more than any one person can do to the betterment of humanity here. And I'm honored, truly honored to know him. We will turn the mic to him later on today. But now I want to start by saying the reality is that today we have some of the most powerful Republican and Democratic influencers in the United States and Europe as well as some very powerful influencers in business, in economics, finance, and of course in law with us. Having said that, we will be posing questions from the audience, who will be posting them online, after each speaker speaks or collectively. And of course, our first speaker is my very dear friend, the Honorable Neil Bush. And Neil is, of course, the president of he's the chairman of President Herbert Walker Bush U.S.-China Relations Foundation. He has been carrying the legacy of his father. He's very strong on that very issue. He is the 3rd of 5 children of President and Mrs. George H.W. Bush. He and his wife Maria live in Houston, Texas, and have 6 children. More power to you, Neil. Mr. Bush chairs Points of Light, which was founded by his father. He serves on the board of Houston Salvation Army and the Bush School of Government and Public Service at Texas A&M University. In addition, Mr. Bush and his wife Maria chair the Barbara Bush Houston Literacy Foundation. Mr. Bush has been involved with energy, real estate, and international business development for decades, beginning in 1980. For 25 years, he has done business internationally. He's been engaged in all types of development projects worldwide. He has been in China over 140 times, and he's an expert on China, and he has visited 40 cities in China. Having said that, um, Mr. Bush, Neil, my dear friend, thank you. We're all yours.
Harley, thank you very much. It's great to see you again. I wish I could be there in person with you, and thank you for organizing this wonderful symposium. To start, I'd like to congratulate AmCham South China for the assistance that you provided member companies and international schools to get back up and running after the pandemic. Harley, thanks to you and your team for raising and investing millions of dollars from member companies to provide badly needed COVID related and poverty alleviation aid to communities in southern China this past year. You know, the work that you do and your team does shines a bright light on one of the things that truly makes kind of stands for American exceptionalism. I'm honored to be invited to speak to this forum on the importance of international trade and IP. As a disclaimer, I'm neither an expert on issues related to global trade or IP and on international relations for that matter. But as a businessman who has spent many years engaged in cross-border work and as a philanthropist that chairs the George H.W. Bush Foundation for U.S.-China relations, I do have some thoughts. I believe, as my father did, that the U.S.-China relationship is the most important bilateral relationship in the world, and that China does not pose an existential threat to the United States, to our economy, to our national security, or our way of life. Since the doors to China opened and we established formal ties over 40 years ago, the two countries have benefited tremendously through our bilateral relations, especially our trade ties. Globalization has played a huge role in lifting economic activity across the globe, and studies have concluded that while the U.S. is less dependent on globalization for growth, the U.S. has been the biggest beneficiary of it. Global supply chains enable U.S. producers to concentrate on their most productive tasks while shifting less efficient tasks to countries like China. Furthermore, globalization has enormously benefited U.S. innovation, a tremendously important driver of the U.S. economy. Strong U.S. capital markets attract venture capital from across the world, and the U.S. capitalist system attracts the very best talents. Lots of Chinese capital and talent has crossed our borders to the benefit of communities all across America. In many respects, it's easier to understand the benefit to China of our bilateral trades. China's remarkable rise has been fueled in part by growing global trade relations, with the US being the largest trade partner. Hundreds of millions of people have been lifted out of poverty. The middle class in China has expanded rapidly. The Chinese market for US products and services is growing. As an aside, the Chinese system and this rapid growth in the livelihood of hundreds of millions has resulted in a huge increase in everyday personal freedoms that didn't exist when I first traveled to China in 1975. And as a freedom-loving American, this progress is worthy of celebration. The idea of decoupling is hard to imagine. It's not in either country's interest to raise walls. Policymakers need to embrace growth enhancing policies to improve health and education services, digital infrastructure, climate resilience, and business and governance practices to mitigate the economic damage caused by the pandemic and to reduce poverty and to advance shared prosperity. And of course, as technologies are innovated, the intellectual property rights of the developer must be protected. The US and other nations are right to press for compliance to international standards of behavior as it relates to IP theft. I heard a statistic, I've traveled to China frequently, as Harley mentioned, and while in China, heard that, kind of hard to believe, but that 50% of Mao Tai, the baijiu that people often drink to break the ice at a dinner, that 50% of Mao Tai consumed in China is counterfeit. If you've been to China enough, enough, you'll hear stories of Chinese companies infringing on the IP rights of other Chinese companies. And I wish I could stay on this Zoom call to hear from the real experts on this matter, but it is my hope, it's my belief that the Chinese court system will continue to mature to adjudicate cases of IP theft. Here's a laundry list of concluding thoughts. The trade tariffs need to be adjusted to pre-Trump levels. The trade war was incredibly short-sighted and failed. Civilized countries in the world, especially the countries with the two largest economies, need to make a concerted effort to engage with one another. China and the US need to establish more frequent bilateral communications covering all matters of common interest, including but not limited to trade. My father practiced the art of relationship building through respectful dialogue, putting yourself in the other guy's shoes, being at the center of his approach. I think we could all learn a lesson from his approach to diplomacy and to developing a global trade system. Americans need to understand that our system of democracy has worked for us, but can't be transplanted to other countries that are in different stages of development or have different historical and cultural conditions. Alternatively, we need to accept that while China's system obviously wouldn't work for us in the United States, it is serving the people of China quite well. So the question is, am I optimistic or pessimistic about the future of US-China trade? On the one hand, rising nationalism in both countries scares me. And who knows what will happen if a nationalist, a Make America Great Again, kind of America's supremacy guy is elected president in 3.5 years from now. Worst case scenario is that we move towards decoupling and fall into what the scholar Graham Allison has coined the Thucydides trap. On the other hand, the depth of our interconnectivity and the roots of our relationship may be deep enough to sustain typhoon-like winds. We share a common humanity, and as such, we must work together to address serious global challenges like climate, health, and poverty alleviation, a lot of which can be accomplished through business interconnectivity. The bottom line is that it is in both countries' interest to engage in more robust trade while ensuring IP protections. So Harley, thank you once again for inviting me to participate. I wish I could stay on for the entire session so that I can learn from the incredible speakers you've lined up. Thank you to all those that are participating.
Neil, thank you so much. What a very persuasive, eloquent delivery. Thank you. As you know, I've asked all speakers to simply speak whatever is on their mind, and I'm happy to hear you have saying you haven't said exactly what a lot of people would like to hear as the thinking process in the United States. I'm going to pose one question to you that's posted by the audience, and I should remind the audience that they can type their questions online, and we will select from them before we pose them to the various speakers. This is actually a good question. It says, how would you go forward in creating an atmosphere and environment in agreeing to disagree with China and work towards reaching agreements on the areas of common interest, and then continuing to work on our differences in a very cordial, civil fashion? And I think that's a pretty good question. It requires a long answer.
Yeah, I touched on it, Harley, and I'll just repeat that I think it's critical that we just establish a kind of institutionalized getting together frequently, and not just on issues related to trade, but climate and health, and the two countries, government to government, business to business, student exchanges. All of these things help in one, raising awareness, building trust, and ultimately leading to collaboration. And I think you'd have to be blind to not see that there are growing challenges that threaten the sustainability of life on Earth for humans, that all civilized nations have to, lock arms to address. And we can't do it in a society where we don't talk to the other guy or where we point fingers at the other guy. We can only do it through exchanges and dialogue. So I'm at the George H.W. Bush Foundation for U.S.-China Relations is a huge advocate of and proponent of, and we try to facilitate, dialogue and exchanges so that there's better understanding, less mistrust, and more cooperation going forward. It's a great question. It's an important, it's an important step that we have to take. And it's not just the U.S. and China, but we're the two most influential countries in the world. So these two countries must do it.
Neil, when President George Herbert Walker Bush was elected president, I recall that he said that he wanted to build a kinder, gentler nation. Could you elaborate on what that meant?
Yeah, my dad was a big believer that the government can't solve all of our problems, that through a civilized society, through individuals pitching in to help their local nonprofit organizations, through volunteerism, that we can be a kinder and gentler and a better nation. We can be and I think, it's been particularly disturbing prior to his passing away for him to have seen the level of political discourse, descend into kind of a ridiculous level of disrespect of one another, and the hatred and the divisiveness of our politics, is really not productive for global relations or even domestic politics in the U.S. So, yeah, he was. It sounds kind of trivial now, but he was a kind and gentle man. He was a loving and good human being, and he wanted to project those values onto a country. And let's be fair. Over the history of the United States, our country has done more good for more people all over the world through our benevolence and kindness and thoughtfulness, and we need to get back to promoting America's great values in that positive context.
And Neil, if I may mention that this is not a question, but a comment from one of the audience saying that with great people like Neil, it's love and promoting peace in the world will enjoy a peace and prosperous life. Thank you, Neil, for everything that you've contributed to U.S.-China relationship, to the betterment of humanity. And I know you need to leave not too long from now, but you've agreed to stay on as long as you can. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Harley.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Our next speaker is an impressive man, a dear friend, Honorable Governor Brian Schweitzer. He was the 23rd governor of the great state of Montana, former chairman of U.S. Western Governors Association, and also the U.S. Democratic Governors Association. And he was a former United States presidential candidate. Following his high school years at the Holy Cross Abbey, Cannon City, Colorado, in 1993, Schweitzer earned his Bachelor of Science degree in International Economy from Colorado State University in 1978, and a Master's of Science in Soil Science. And he is a soil scientist, to my surprise, from Montana State University, Bozeman in 1980. Upon finishing school, the Governor Schweitzer worked as an irrigation developer on projects in Africa, Asia, Europe, and South America. He spent several years working in Libya and Saudi Arabia, and he speaks Arabic. He returned to Montana in 1986 to launch a ranching and irrigation business, a very successful business in Whitefish. Bill Clinton appointed Governor Schweitzer to United States Department of Agriculture as a member of Montana USDA Farm Service Agency Committee, where he served 7 years. While working for the USDA, he was appointed to the Montana Rural Development Board in 1996 and the National Drought Task Force. Please welcome Governor Brian Schweitzer. Governor.
Well, Harley, it's an honor. It's an honor to be back with you, even if it's by this crazy system. Now, folks, if you lose me in the middle of this thing, I've got a great excuse, and here's the excuse. I live 46 miles from the nearest traffic light here in Montana. I'm out on my ranch right now. We kind of have internet, but it's a hit or miss proposition. Listen, Montana is a place that is not very populated, and it's an exporter. It's an exporter to Asia of a lot of things. Montana exports 90% of the wheat that we produce, and most of it goes to Asia. Montana exports 80% of all the beef that we produce, and most of it goes to Asia. Montana produces lentils and peas, and almost all of that goes to Asia. So we are in the export business. We understand what it means to have customers who are friends worldwide. And like Neil said, we have to build relationships. You can't please a customer by calling them names. You please a customer by producing what they need, when they need it, and have them happy to buy it from you again. That is how commerce works. Let me tell you how commerce doesn't work. During the last year and a half, this pandemic and the supply lines worldwide have collapsed. No matter what in the United States right now, you want to buy a new car? Well, you put some money down and you wait. And you're going to wait months, maybe longer than that, depending on what you're trying to buy. Used cars are up 25, 30, 40%. You want to buy tools? You can't get the tools you want. You're going to have to buy used tools. The explanation that we're given by a lot of folks for a lot of these technology items is we've got all the cars that we need, whether that be in China with NIO or whether that be in the United States with Tesla or Chevrolet. We got the cars. All we need is something this tiny, a chip. The supply line broke apart for the chip. So the car's sitting there. The tool is sitting there. I went in yesterday, and I was talking to the local dealer here. Now, we don't have much of a street here, but it's kind of a street. And the only automobile dealer we have there is the snowmobile dealer. And so I went in and I tried to order a new snowmobile. No can do. We can't get them. The snowmobiles are made in Minnesota, but the chips are coming from Asia. So the supply line completely broke down worldwide. It tells us how important trade is. Almost everywhere in the world that builds something gets something from someplace else to finish the product. Now, during this last year, during this pandemic where we've been faced with these things, we've learned a few things. We understand that maybe we ought to have a supply of items. Maybe we ought not be just in time, because who knows what happens next. But I guess I have even a larger concern than that. I mentioned that Montana is an exporter of things. In fact, if Montana were a country, we would rank third in the world in our coal resources. It would be the United States first, then comes Russia, then there would be Montana. But you see, Montana is going to have a whole lot of coal when no one's using coal anymore. We still need coal. That's a portion of our energy supply, and it will be a part of our energy supply. But increasingly, we're looking at new ways of making energy and storing energy. Last year, I invested in a company in China called NIO. Some of you know what NIO is. That's an electric car maker, and they are ahead of their time. They call them the Tesla of China, but they're doing some things that Tesla isn't doing. I noticed in the last quarter that their production was down, not because they didn't make the cars, but because they couldn't get the chips. Electric cars are important and they're interesting. We can make mistakes and it can last a long time and it affects the entire world. Let me give you an example. The year's 1910 in the United States, and cars are just starting to be purchased and owned by some of the wealthier families. There weren't that many cars. There were thousands, but you know, the average family didn't have a car yet. But in 1910, this is going to surprise some of you. In 1910, 50% of the cars made in America were electric cars with batteries. There was one company called the Detroit Automobile Company. They guaranteed you when you drove the car off the lot, they guaranteed that that battery would get you 100 miles on a charge. Now, just a few years ago, there were only 3 cars in the world that could make that guarantee. And you have to ask yourself, well, what happened? Well, a few things happened along the way. Petroleum was really cheap, and it was cheaper to make a gasoline car. And frankly, and for all of you men listening, you're not going to like this. For all of you women listening, you know all about this. Men preferred to drive those gasoline cars because they made a lot of noise. And their neighbors who didn't have a car, they would look out their window and they would see you driving by with that loud car, and they were impressed. If you drove by an electric car, they didn't even know you had one. Well, today, the world is scrambling. Every advanced economy in America and around the world, everybody is challenging one another to get better battery technology. And yet, I just explained to you that 110 years ago, half the cars made in America were electric. What happened? How'd this fall apart? Well, we made some mistakes along the way. So the Great Depression came along in the United States, and then FDR was elected president, and he wanted to stimulate the economy all across America. And one of the things he was concerned about was he looked out at rural America. He looked at that grand big place from Alberta and Saskatchewan and Canada, all the way to Texas and Kansas, Nebraska and Montana, the Dakotas, Colorado. And he recognized that all the small towns and all the farms didn't have an electric source. There was no big utility sending electric wires to them. And so FDR, he proclaimed that we can't have islands of poverty and an ocean of prosperity. We are going to create the rural electrification. So they did. And they spent a lot of money so they could build electric wires that came from everywhere across America to go to every last farm, even at the end of the road, a farm like I live on. Well, what he didn't seem to understand that in 1930, most of those farmers he was talking about had wind turbines in their backyard and had batteries in their basement. You know, one time I asked my dad, I said, Dad, what was the biggest change in your life when electricity came to the farm? He thought about it for a long time because he's an ethnic German that came from Russia. You know how they are, before he said anything. But he said, well, I suppose that we could weld on the farm at a little hotter temperature. They'd had electricity there for 20 years. Now, if FDR would have invested in batteries, imagine where we would be today. Imagine where we'd be. But I guess we're going to catch up because the whole world is trying to get there. China, you're making 90% of the solar panels on the planet. China, you're making half of the wind turbines on the planet. So now I'm going to get to another place that I need to get to. First, I'm going to say this. If we're going to solve global problems in the next decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, it's going to be done because there's leadership in 2 places, China and the United States. We got 75% of the engineers and the scientists on the planet in our 2 countries. We have those technologists and we have that infrastructure to invest. So one time I was asked, we were a group of people, pretty big thinkers, and we were asked, what is the greatest challenge to humankind? Well, somebody thought it was climate change. Somebody else thought it was a nuclear catastrophe. Somebody else thought it was something else and something else. I think the greatest catastrophe we've got and the greatest challenge that we have is population. Today, we have 7 billion people on this planet. During the lifetime of some of you who are tuned in right now, we're going to get to 14 billion people. I already know this. You heard that. I'm an earth scientist. I've made my living in agriculture. I know that the way we produce our food today will not feed 14 billion people. I'm going to tell you another thing that should scare you. The cheapest calorie that we consume in the world, comes from wheat. If you make bread and you make pasta out of wheat, and the wheat belts are in Northern Europe and North America on that border between the United States and Canada. That's where we produce wheat. And in most of those areas, it's a delicate climate. It's colder than what you can usually grow corn and soybeans. It's drier than what you can grow corn and soybeans. And if it gets just a little bit drier or a little bit colder in that giant belt, it isn't that there's another crop that you can grow. That becomes grassland. That's the end of producing food. And I'm going to remind you that wheat is the cheapest source of calories on the planet. China and the United States are going to lead the way. China is the largest importer of food on the planet. America is one of the largest exporters. But there's a whole lot more people in this planet. And people need to eat first. And we need to have a system that helps them. I'm not going to talk about what causes climate change because that's controversial. I am going to say to you there is climate change because there's been climate change for 4 billion years. Sometimes it happens faster like it is now. Sometimes it takes tens of thousands. It's going to take the scientists and the engineers from the greatest countries in the world, and that includes China and the United States, to develop food systems that are not based on the kind of agriculture that we have today. That's not going to be producing food out in fields because we don't have enough fields to do it. It's a great challenge. It's a great opportunity. And it means that China and the United States are going to continue to lead the world in the most critical area. This is not like not having a computer chip so you can buy a new car. This is about feeding families. No question about it. Europe, China, the United States, we'll always get food from someplace because we're powerful and we have money. But if we've got 10 billion people on this planet that are having a difficult time finding food, we're all going to have a difficult time moving forward. So we have some real opportunities. We have some real opportunities for the scientists, the engineers, and the business people from both China and the United States to change the world. And I like being part of changing the world. I like saving the world. How about you?
Brian, what a fantastic presentation. Thank you. You touch on areas that I don't think any one of us really think about on a day-to-day basis, but they're extremely important topics and issues. I have one question that was, well, many questions posed to you, but I would like to share one. The question is, how much influence do various governors of different states have in the U.S. trade negotiation process, and how could they exert more influence going forward?
First answer is very little. For the most part, the trade negotiations or discussions between Washington, D.C. and whatever capital there is around the world. A governor in our constitutional system is the CEO of a state. And your state outline is there. We're one of the 50 states, but we're just a state. And whenever there's international discussions, those discussions are led by the federal government. So that's the answer there. But I can tell you this, and most of you know this, because you've had governors and lieutenant governors from across America lead trade delegations. That's the role of a governor, to bring people who are actually producing something or actually need to buy something, bring them to China. Introduce them to people who are producing, introduce them to people who are buying, and put pieces together. That's what a governor does.
Thank you, Brian. Really appreciate your insight. I'm sure people will be debating everything you've said for a long time to come. Thank you. We might have more questions for you later on, but now I'm going to move on to our next speaker, and I would say probably one that brings a lot of irony to the table. You talked about electrical vehicles. I think that's really a very important area. A person who is a very good friend, Brian Karolicki, he was the Lieutenant Governor of Nevada. He was the Secretary of, I'm sorry, he was the Treasurer of Nevada. He termed that on both areas, the only one to have done that in both cases. As you probably know, Elon Musk and I received the 2017 Oslo Business for Peace Award, which is awarded by a committee of Nobel laureates in peace and economics. And I find it ironic that I'm sitting here talking to the person who's going to be competing head-on with Tesla, someone who had just completed a $3.4 billion US dollar merger. He has $1 billion cool cash in his pocket for his war chest, and he's going to be producing electrical vehicles in the US and also in China. There's a lot that we can hear from him. He has a long history in government, a long history in business. Governor Karolicki is, and of course, the company is called Faraday Future, of which he's chairman. And of course, if you remember Faraday, long before Tesla, Faraday was a highly recognized leading scientist in chemistry as well as electricity. He created the first electrical motor in the world, and a number of other things. And that's so it's very appropriate that we talk about Faraday today as one that has just entered, well, had entered for quite some time, but actually moving forward with $1 billion to start actually building and delivering cars. Brian he is a veteran of private banking industry and a master of principal finance, municipal finance. Brian began his career on Wall Street working with high-profile films such as Smith Barney and Bankers Trust Company. A temporary foray into state government role unexpectedly led Brian to a 24-year career in public service and to four sweeping election victories in Nevada constitutional office of lieutenant governor and state treasurer. Brian is the first person in Nevada history to be term limited twice. As lieutenant governor, Brian led Nevada's economic expansion effort and spearheaded strategic legislation that prompted the state's emergence as an economic innovator and a preferred location for new and expanding businesses such as the Tesla Gigafactory. He served on a wide variety of critical positions, including chairman of the Nevada Commission on Economic Development, chairman of the Nevada Commission on Tourism, and president of the Nevada State Senate. In these capacities, Brian spent considerable time focusing on international tourism and economic development, particularly in the People's Republic of China. Please welcome Governor Brian Karolicki, chairman of Faraday Future, and one who I'm really anxious to hear a great deal from. Brian?
Hello, Harley. How are you, sir? It's so nice to have that introduction. I'm going to have to send a copy of that to my mother because, I don't get that very often. I have to go offshore to get that kind of warmth. It is a small world. It was very interesting to hear the other Brian in this conversation with a fancy title, not only be a great proponent of his state, as he should be, but also in the EV space with Neil. So, Governor, I look forward to helping change the world together in our different niches. So, what a great pleasure it is to be here. Harley, congratulations to you and to AmCham. You bring so many different parts together. I don't know if people really realize the role that you and your organization play, certainly in South China, but I would even say beyond. But what you've pulled together tonight, it just feels normal. I'm sorry we can't do it in person. Hopefully that will happen again shortly. My friends at United Airlines and Air China keep reaching out, saying that they've got a seat for me. But someday our visas will work again, and I just can't wait for that day to happen. Also listening to Harley, everyone calls you Harley, and I wish that I had a single name that was known worldwide. It's like Madonna or Adele. You say Harley, and anyone in on this planet knows who we're talking about. So Harley, good on you for that. And my other Harley factoid of the day is it's actually in my time. So I'm on the West Coast in the Western United States, Pacific time. It is still Harley's birthday. So you all on the other side have missed it by a day. But Harley, I want to wish you a very, very happy birthday. And hopefully we can share a red wine or a Mau Tai, not that 50% fake stuff that Mr. Honorable Bush was speaking about, but you bring out the good stuff. And I hope we can celebrate your next birthday together, sir. I'd like to approach my remarks really from wearing my two favorite hats, and my introduction talked about what they were. But being the former Lieutenant Governor of Nevada, I had a fascinating portfolio of responsibilities, specifically tourism and economic development. And in my current role as the chairman of the board of Faraday Future, an extraordinary company with a very colorful history, and founder, certainly well known on both sides of the Pacific. But as you mentioned, we are now a publicly traded company and off to produce vehicles here very shortly, well, in the next year. But I first became a regular visitor to China, if not a frequent one. I mean, certainly not in Mr. Bush category. I think I heard 120 times. I'll say perhaps a couple dozen times. But in my capacity as chairman of tourism in Nevada, and many of you may not be familiar with Nevada per se, but you certainly are of one of my cities, that would be Las Vegas. So being the governor of Las Vegas in China, that's a really good job. So I would frequently visit. We had offices in Beijing and Shanghai and Hong Kong. And it was my job beyond the economic development portfolio, which is always interesting, but one deal at a time. But the job that kept my focus was making it easier for people from China to get their visas, to get the right transportation, frictionless, to get to the United States and enjoy my state of Nevada and oftentimes Las Vegas, and also to make sure those planes had folks from Nevada and the United States going back. But it was an opportunity for me to absolutely become enamored by China. Guangzhou was in particular an important place for us. I think many of you know that the Guangzhou U.S. consulate produced most of the EB-5 visas and many of the tourism visas. So Harley and I had some quality time, and whenever there were pickles or problems, somehow we found Harley in the middle of solving the problems. But it was just a fascinating relationship that we had in what we were able to do. Interestingly, many of my trips to China were to speak to folks at the U.S. State Department, again, trying to get visas and other things more easily secured. I think many of you who've had a long history will know that getting a tourism visa to the United States as a Chinese national 20 years ago was not the easiest thing. And tourism visas really started out in the tens of thousands. And I think the last time in pre-COVID, I checked, we were at several million visas issued annually, and with the multi-entry visa, who knows how many times people were going back and forth. But that relationship and the movement of people just grew exponentially, and it was just a great joy for someone helping and working to make this traffic happen more seamlessly. It was a great joy for us. But obviously tourism was the bread and butter. China. So again, this may not be the more traditional widget conversation of international trade, but people is part of are part of our commerce and economic development. But China at the time was the 5th largest overseas market for Nevada, and and it was probably one of the most important segments because international tourists certainly stay longer, perhaps spend more money in shopping and shows and other activities. And it was the Chinese visitor who was most important to us. So it was incredibly strong for us. I miss that world terribly and missing my friends, but I think the world is starting to get back to normal. I know the airplanes aren't quite flying yet, but I'm hoping that beginning next year, the Consumer Electronics Show, CES, which is the world's most influential annual technology event, is scheduled to occur in person, January 5 to 8, 2022. And if I can point out that Chinese New Year begins February 1st, 2022, Year of the Tiger, perhaps some of you can stay a little longer and just transition into a little Chinese New Year celebration. Perhaps you can even visit. I'm sounding like Governor Schweitzer. I'm not talking about wheat. I'm talking about the hospitality industry, and perhaps a lot of calories if you look at it. But we have a brand resort called Resorts World Las Vegas. It cost $4.3 billion, and it took about 6 years to build. But come check it out, and hopefully you'll have that chance to do it very soon. The other hat I wanted to discuss, as I said, and Harley, you did a beautiful job introducing it, is Faraday Future, which is now Faraday Future Intelligent Electric. We are celebrating a 1-week anniversary as a public company, but it's been an incredible journey for this company. I think many of you are familiar with the founder, YT Jia, who, he's, from the United States perspective, I would almost compare him to a Steve Jobs, just brilliant, a visionary, a man who can change the world, who has in many ways. He's made a fortune because of his ideas. He's been challenged to keep that. There have been pickles here and there, some boardroom intrigue. But what YT has built is one of the vehicles that I believe is going to change the world in extraordinary ways. And our friend Elon Musk, perhaps even one day, will be buying his own FF91. But it's important because there's dual DNA here, both North America and Europe. The CEO is a former BMW head of EV, but certainly China. And some of the support for FF has absolutely come from China, and we do hope to begin JV operations, in the near future once we get production squared away. But for those of you who may not be familiar on the details, it's a California-based global shared intelligent mobility ecosystem, and those are a lot of words, but essentially it changes the user experience. We're trying to create a place that's not the office, but it's the world in which you work in your office. It's the luxury, it's extreme, but the connectivity to the world will change how people will travel. And with autonomous driving, it should become even more of a utility. And I would submit, particularly in China. FF currently has our engineering, sales, operational capabilities in China. And as I said, we hope to be doing some joint venture soon, but the headquarters are in LA. There's $2 billion worth of intellectual property, in this vehicle. And if any of you find yourselves in Los Angeles or New York City, we can make arrangements to have you take a ride. And Harley, I'm happy to drive you. Americans like to drive. Not to stereotype, but many Asians like to be driven. And so Harley, if you sit in the back seat and, don't ask me to wear a cap and gloves, maybe for your birthday, I'll drive you around in a FF91. But this car is extraordinary. Again, I don't want to be selling, but the point here is the EV space. The governments of China, the government of the United States, most of the governments around the world have a stated policy to reduce the carbon emissions and the footprint that our economies produce. And so to have a public policy, and I think by 2030, 40% of the cars in China that are newly purchased will be electric. And by 2035, it's mandated that all new vehicles, not only in China, but in California and other jurisdictions, must be electric. So with government policy of ridding the planet of some of these carbon and the combustion engine, but with other goals, we're just excited to be what we think is in a great place at the right time in a market of 1.4 billion people. It's a place where we absolutely will focus on, and to have the DNA in FF culture, we think will only help tremendously. Supply chains, go back to the themes of how supply chains work, whether it's chips, whether it's other aspects, precious rare earth metals. These are all things that are going to be critically addressed for us, is corporations to address these issues going forward. So we will be delighted to work with all of the regulators involved. But we can't wait to bring this vehicle and bring this camaraderie and bring some friendly competition to this EV space, and again, make this place a better world. And Harley, as I said, if you're willing to drive in the back seat, hopefully I won't spill your coffee when I reach 60 miles per hour in 2.39 seconds in my 1,050 horsepower vehicle. You look good in it, and I can make your reservation. And the reservations, we hope we'll be producing this vehicle in about a year, so it'll coincide for your next birthday just perfectly. So we'll talk offline, but can't wait to have you be a passenger and see what all of this exciting technology is, not only with FF, but all of the EV companies on both sides of the Pacific. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Governor. It's really exciting for members of the American Chamber of Commerce in South China to have had the first public appearance of the chairman of Faraday Future to be at this forum. I'm thankful to you for that. It's a historic date, and I think a few years from now, people will be saying, "Wait a minute, Elon Musk must be thinking he should have done the same," and so do others. I do predict you a very bright future. Certainly, you have all the credentials to do it. Your experience in establishing the Gigafactory of Tesla in Nevada certainly will help Faraday Future. There's one question that's been posed to you that will put you in the hot seat.
You promised all.
I'm sorry.
You promised all questions, but go ahead. I'm ready for you.
One question. I'll ask it to you as they have written it. It says that, Governor, you plan on producing cars simultaneously in the United States and in China, building two factories simultaneously. How do you think the U.S.-China relationship is going to impact your plans, and what do you hope for?
Good. That's actually a splendid question. I'm delighted for it. Just again, to be clear on expectations and the plans. So our $1 billion we will be using to produce the FF91. I urge all of you to go to ff.com and go check it out. You can make your reservations for the vehicle, and we hope to produce the vehicle within, to get it, we've made the vehicle, but to make it in a production way, we hope to make up to 10,000 vehicles at a plant in Hanford, California, in Central California, starting a year from now when production is capable. In years 22, 23, and 24, contract manufacturing in Korea. And we hope and are in discussions for JVs in China, because again, that's where we want to be. Those issues and state-owned enterprises and government, we just need to get it started here. But I think the larger production will be on that side, and those EV conversations continue and are ongoing. And the sensitive question, if that's what it was, the political intrigue, certainly our world is more complicated than it was several years ago. And I'm a former politician. Now I'm a businessman, and it's above my pay grade. I will let the clever people in Beijing and Washington, D.C. and other capitals around the world, answer those things. But we all agree on the need to reduce carbon emissions, and vehicles are absolutely a critical component of those emissions. And so if we can agree from a planetary standpoint and carbon reduction, that if we can create technologies and economy and transform the transportation industry using, we believe that this industry won't be the lightning rod, if you will, as other industries might be. And we've already gone to CFIUS things. We've already done, a wide variety. So certainly anything can happen. But the technology is too important to be subjected to some of the political intrigue. I'm not naive. I know how it works, but it's so important that we're hoping common sense prevails, and our citizens, wherever they might be, can benefit from extraordinary technology while helping this planet a little bit better for the next generation.
Governor, one last quick question before we move on to the next speaker. And the question is being asked by the audience saying, what are the competitive advantages of Faraday?
You know, number one, if you just sit in the vehicle, it's different. You know, you don't use a Tesla because you just want to stay inside of it. You know, it's a third internet space of living. It's a smartphone on wheels. You know, massive screens, comfort. I could be conducting this meeting from the office space in the back seat of this vehicle. You know, it's that good. But you know, just subtle things that I think many of your members can appreciate. You know, who manufacture and work, you know, both sides and both cultures or multiple cultures. But for example, you know, in the West, you know, some of the interior of this car is extraordinary leather. I mean, it's just, you know, but in the West, we like the smell of leather. It's just something that's appealing. You can go get a car wash and have leather scent, you know, put into your vehicle to make it smell fresher and newer. You know, again, it's my understanding in Asia and in China in particular, this might be obscure, is the smell of leather is not necessarily appealing. So we are literally baking the leather to eliminate any leather smell that might be unappealing to a consumer in China. So, you know, again, that's such a superficial look, but it's the subtleties, it's the understanding of the market, the distribution channels, the partners that we have from an investment standpoint, but we hope from a production standpoint soon in China, and the incredible technology, the performance capabilities. You know, it outperforms Tesla in many ways. So there are different markets for different cars. Governor Schweitzer's car and vehicle and our vehicle, I don't think will be competing with one another, but you know, everyone want their different experience, and we just can't wait to be part of the solution for the climate. And we believe with this dual DNA, the subtle understanding between all, you know, all sides, all consumers, will give us a strategic and business advantage.
Governor, congratulations again on a very successful merger and fundraiser and placement. And I'm very happy for you. I'm sure you will succeed in a great way. We'll be reading a lot about what you're going to do in the future. And I'm going to start saving so I can buy one of your cars.
We'll give you a deal. Harley, thank you so much. And again, very, very happy birthday to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Governor. Moving right along, I'm going to move to a very dear friend. He's an internationally renowned finance, banking, and trade executive and former head of origination and R&B internationalization at HSBC Americas. And Americas simply meaning everything from north to south to middle to central to South America and every country involved in it. Martin is the head of U.S. client relations for a financial institution based in New York. Martin recently left HSBC, where he was in charge of origination and R&B internationalization. Based in New York City, he originated and managed cross-border capital market businesses and flow business across Asia Pacific, North America, and Latin America, with main focus on R&B denominated and Asia-related business opportunities. He also served as chairman of HSBC U.S. R&B Steering Committee and co-chair of regulatory consideration subcommittees of Michael Bloomberg's U.S. R&B Working Group, where he advised the U.S. marketplace on R&B trading, clearing, management, and settlement capabilities, and educates corresponding operation practices and regulatory requirements. Under his stewardship, HSBC USA was named 2020 Best R&B Bank for the 5th year in a row. He also pitched and won HSBC's Canada, Chile, and Argentina 4 years in a row, and first time ever in 2020 for HSBC Mexico and Uruguay, where he named where they were named best RMB banks by the asset. His efforts and commitment have also led HSBC to be awarded Outstanding Member of the Year but China General Chamber of Commerce in 2016. Martin, I am honored to have you with us today. The experience you bring to us is worth millions, if not billions or trillions. We're happy to hear from you. The floor is all yours. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you, Harley, for your kind introduction and invitation, and everyone from the American Chamber of Commerce who's involved in putting this event together. Harley, one more time, happy birthday to you. Sorry I could not see you in person. Hopefully I can celebrate your birthday next year. So good morning to you in China, and good evening to anybody who's here in the US. It is really fantastic and my pleasure to speak to all of you remotely today and continue this dialogue. It is also good to hear and see that everyone is safe and healthy, and hopefully we can all see each other in person. I would like to spend just a few minutes and provide to you some of the latest trends and business development in terms of the renminbi and the investment channels into China from the US point of view. As we all know, China's GDP continues to grow. Second quarter GDP for this year was around 7.9%, and the forecast for the second half of the year continues to be quite bullish of 12.7%. There's also a number of factors supporting strong GDP growth, such as the growth of the middle class. I expect China's household wealth to grow by 8.5% annually over the next 5 years, bringing the China investable assets to about 46 trillion by 2025. The number of high net worth individuals, defined as 10 million in RMB, is expected to actually double in size by 2025 from 2 million of this year. E-commerce is another area of GDP boost. China's internet penetration has reached already 68%, which is around 989 million people that use internet as of first quarter of this year. That is still lagging compared to other development countries such as the US that enjoys about 90% internet usage. You can imagine the impact on the GDP if China internet penetration can be increased just by 10%. Last year, China's e-commerce sales already reached $1.8 trillion. And this year, the expectation that I'm seeing is around 2.1 trillion. Other factors which will impact GDP, it's the usage of the usage of the RMB includes the Belt and Road Initiative, which you are all aware of, as well as the green development. China is the biggest green bonds issuer year to date. In terms of the actual RMB trends and the latest data, currently, according to SWIFT, Hong Kong still remains the largest RMB clearing worldwide, accounting for over 71% of the average total offshore RMB turnover in terms of value. US is the fourth largest clearing center with just over 3.2%, slightly up from 2020. This year, RMB has retained its position as the fifth most active currency for global payments by value, with a share of only 1.9%, and the top third currency in the trade finance. Overall, RMB payments value actually increased by 21% compared to last year, while in general, all payment currencies decreased by almost 6%. I also see a major increase of RMB as the reserve currency and the investment currency, a major uptick year over year, about 31% plus increase for RMB financial assets held by overseas entities. Investors are using RMB as they invest into the fixed income and the equity markets into China. These days, China is quite attractive, with the higher yields versus the US. Although recent, events such as with the Didi's IPO in the US do raise a number of concerns and questions from the US investors, which may impact in the short term some of the investment strategies for the qualified US investors as they potentially rethink their strategies. In terms of the investment channels into China, you may not be aware of this, but throughout the last 5 years, I see a number of initiatives and platforms designed by the Chinese government to develop more investment options into China and make it less complicated, allowing US investors to invest into both the Chinese equity as well as the fixed income market directly from the US through channels such as QFE, our QFE Bond Connect, Stock Connect, and CIBM. I also introductions of the China specific index inclusions for equities such as the MSCI, the FTSE Russell, S&P, and the bond market Bloomberg index, for example, which is about 140 assets under management, are also a major drivers that I see here in the US of RMB usage. In terms of the central banks, 5 years ago, only 3 central banks invested in RMB, and now that number is over 70. So a huge increase just in a few years. Currently, I see a 26% increase of the world foreign exchanges reserves in RMB. Major uptick, in the last 5 years. You probably also witnessed latest news in March and April coming from PBOC to make another push to promote RMB. There's also a potential scenario with some of the companies in China will be required to only accept RMB in the worst case scenario, but let's see what happens. It is always good to have a plan B if your firm is only using US dollars or euro or pounds for payment. Highly encourage suppliers, importers, exporters to at least understand the latest trends and policies and be ready to trade in RMB. Just as a reminder, People's Bank of China has designated about 27 offshore RMB clearing banks in 25 centers, covering all the major financial regions and centers such as New York, London, Frankfurt, Singapore, Tokyo, and Hong Kong. It is a good practice and reach out to your local clearing banks to find out more details on how to make an advantage of this service and how they can provide to you RMB liquidity in your country of operations outside China. I'm sure many of the members of the AmCham probably have that challenge. Despite the pandemic challenges in the US and globally, we can actually see some activity amongst the US clients who have presence and operations in Asia. Although still fairly low in volumes when compared to Hong Kong, some clients are actually deciding to open up RMB accounts here in the US in order to improve their operational efficiency and remit their onshore in China RMB back home to the headquarters, collected from commission payments or other payments in China. Quick fun fact, despite the pandemic, RMB volumes, clearing volumes were not affected that much. As a matter of fact, clearing volumes remain stable, and we are seeing more clients interested in the clearing business. We also see an increase in the FX volumes. There's also a number of recent announcements in China this year designed to further increase usage of RMB. I'm going to give you just 2 examples because I don't want to spend too much time on this. But for example, in March, this is close to your home, Holly. In order to advance the building of the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau, Greater Bay Area, the China Pilot Free Trade Zone and the National Integrated Demonstration Zone for greater openness of the service sector to support the building of the higher level new institution of the open economy and to enable the financial sector to better serve the real economy. The People's Bank of China and the State Administration for Foreign Exchange, SAFE, have decided to implement the first pilot programs of integrated RMB and foreign currency cross-border cash pooling for multinational corporations in Shenzhen and Beijing. This effort is expected to further ease the coordinated use of cross-border funds by multinational clients. And another quick example, in January, PBOC and 5 other departments issued a notice of further optimizing cross-border RMB policies to support stabilizing foreign trade and foreign investment. The notice took in effect in February, and it aims to optimize management of the cross-border RMB. This note covers a wide array of topics, such as the need for the real economy to promote a higher level of trade and investment, and further simplification of RMB settlement and cross-border RMB settlement process. This note aims to optimize cross-border RMB investment, enhancing and management of the cross-border RMB receipts and payments under personal accounts and the use of RMB bank settlement accounts for overseas institutions. So the big really question is, what can we do here in the US and globally outside China, such as Europe, LATAM, to increase RMB usage? In general, we have to continue to educate the market here in the US and globally as to why RMB. Why RMB? RMB is still quite exotic currency in the Americas as a whole. At least that's the perception at this stage. Not many companies are using it, but some companies, but I do see some trends that are indicating that there is definitely more interest of using RMB. There are many potential benefits of using RMB. I think clients should think about the following questions in terms of why RMB. First, if you are operating in China, if you are, then you should be using RMB for sure. You save the FX cost, you simplify the FX admin process. It is a natural hedge for payables and receivables. It's also a natural hedge for assets and liabilities for capital injection in RMB into China. Next question is, are you trading with China? I think using RMB is potentially cheaper. You do have a stronger negotiation power. I do see a discount factor if a client uses RMB for invoicing, gives you widened client supplier base. Not every client in China can accept foreign currency such as USD. And finally, if you do have any excess RMB, let's say in the US or globally, RMB can be deposited let's say in the US to pay for future invoices in your clearing bank locally in the ground. Any excess RMB cash can be invested in a wide range of offshore products, CDs, bonds, ETFs, and other channels of investments, which I briefly mentioned before, including QPR, QP, Bank Connect, Stock Connect, etc., via Hong Kong. Chinese market is a lot more attractive these days here in the US. So that's it from me. I'm going to keep this very brief because I know my topic may not be as exciting as other topics. But again, thank you for your time and looking forward to any questions that you may have.
Martin, you have certainly simplified a very complex area in your explanation, and I thank you for that. RMB is a point of concern for or interest for many different people, for many different sources. The concern about RMB replacing the US dollar as a reserve currency. There's and I think there's a lot of worthy and a lot of unfounded speculation that goes on about it. So it's very happy to have you here. I have one question that we need to ask you, and that's posted by some of our audience in advance. The question is, are Chinese buyers and suppliers more interested in using RMB invoicing in light of the coronavirus pandemic?
Well, thank you, Harley. I mean, this is a question that we get all the time from all the clients. I mean, I spend, maybe 6 hours a day talking to, a number of clients just on this topic. I mean, in the past, a majority of buyer suppliers might prefer local currency invoicing because, again, that may reduce cost and FX exposure. For Chinese buyers and suppliers, using RMB as a settlement currency, it's more convenient. And again, it's a safe way to lock the cost and FX risk, especially in the Corona pandemic period. On the other hand, on the other side as well, Chinese importers and exporters might also have some interest to be both with foreign currencies such as US dollars or euro, as hedging options are easily available to them, and if they are comfortable to hold foreign currencies on the balance sheet. I believe the recent pandemic should also move buyers and suppliers to even further be interested in using RMB due to the FX instability of currencies and also a big increase in the invoice time lag. As RMB volumes and the working knowledge grows in the next few years, it is a good assumption that this trend will continue post this pandemic. The big challenge that will be around, the Chinese companies' appetite to only accept RMB We do have some occasional feedback from the U.S. corporates indicating that they did try to use RMB for invoicing from their home country, but the supplier rejected and prefer foreign currency payments instead because they don't have access to it otherwise. I believe there will be a big spike in RMB usage if this situation could be changed, and obviously encourage some of the suppliers, exporters to use RMB. On the other side, coming from the U.S. investment point of view, I also see a major, obviously, increase of RMB usage for investment, which I mentioned before. Especially with those clients who are interested to invest into China's equity and bond market. Again, the channels that currently exist, QFR, QFI, Bank, Stock Connect, are very easy to follow. And also with the low and sometimes zero interest rates in the U.S., there's definitely an appetite for the U.S. investors to look elsewhere, such as the bond market in China, which offers at times more appealing return on investment. Hope this helps, Harley.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you so much for your time. I know you are on the East Coast and it's a very late hour for you, but we thank you for the time and really appreciate you being with us today. We're going to move on to the second section of our program today. I will turn the floor over to our very esteemed colleague, the chair of our IPR committee, member of the Board of Governors, Dr. David Boxbaum, who I introduced briefly earlier today. He's been here for 48 years. He's been an extremely influential person, and he's one of the most recognized IPR experts, especially on China's IPR issues that I know of. Having said that, one of the things I'm most grateful to David Boxbaum is the fact that he has contributed many different policy papers that we have issued on behalf of our membership and to our membership. The latest policy paper that will be issued, and it will be sent to all of those who signed up and participated in today's conference, is the analysis of the IPR sections of 4 major trade agreements, which are 3 multilateral trade agreements and 1 bilateral trade agreement. And that involved the ETA, which is between US and China, the Economic and Trade Agreement between the government of People's Republic of China and the United States government, CAI, which is being negotiated, Comprehensive Agreement on Investment between China and EU. We have our dear friend, Vice President of the EU Chamber of Commerce in China and Chairman of EU Chamber of Commerce in South China, will be talking to us about that later. RCEP between China and 14 countries, which basically called the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, and it was signed in 2020 by 15 countries, including 10 member states of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, Australia, China, Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, and so far China and Thailand have internally ratified the agreements, while other member countries have indicated that they will approve it by 2021, which make RCEP effective January 1, 2022. And then, of course, we also have CPTPP between 11 countries, which cover everything from east to west and north to south of the world. As we also know, the US withdrew from that agreement, and something that I hope we can address during the discussion. Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, hereinafter referred to as CPTPP, signed by Japan, Australia, Chile, New Zealand, Singapore, Brunei, Malaysia, Vietnam, Mexico, and Peru, after the withdrawal of the US in particular. Canada, Japan, Mexico, Singapore, New Zealand, and Australia ratified it in 2018. According to CPTPP, the agreement became effective on the approval of more than 6 countries in 2019. Vietnam ratified the CPP, in 2019. Having used all of my time, I will now turn the floor over to our highly experienced legend, Dr. David Boxbaum. David, floor is yours.
Harley, thank you very much. I'm very honored by having you inviting me to participate in this wonderful seminar. Someone said in a previous speaker that when you hear the name Harley, all the world knows whom you're speaking. And indeed, Harley is the real legend in China. He is certainly the outstanding business spokesman for American and international business in China. He's a leader in organizing all kinds of events in China that promote knowledge. He's a leader in promoting charity for the poor in China. He's a leader in all sorts of ways in China, and perhaps the most prominent foreign business person in all of China. I'm very honored to be invited to this seminar by Harley. Secondly, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, that is Mr. Ben Jacobs. Mr. Ben Jacobs was born and raised in the suburbs of Chicago. He spent the last 12 years living between China and the United States. Interestingly enough, from 2014 to 2015, he lived in Wuhan. He had nothing to do with the virus. Ben Jacobs is a senior manager at the China Center of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in D.C. He's a leading expert on China IP. In his work, with business addresses challenges in the areas of IP, digital trade, cybersecurity standards, competition policy, and market access. He leads China Center ITC Data Working Group. AmCham has analyzed developments in China's ICT and data space, and oversees all China Center work on Chinese intellectual property laws and regulations. Prior to joining the Chamber, Ben worked as an ICT policy analyst for the Information Technology Office. I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Mr. Ben Jacobs.
Well, thank you so much, David, for that kind introduction. Am I coming through okay? Can you hear me?
Hear you perfectly.
Excellent. So yeah, thank you, David, and thank you, Harley, and AmCham South China for hosting me and the fellow panelists for coming together to discuss this really important topic. And I'm going to try and keep this fairly brief. My task over the next several minutes is to cover the bilateral slice of what David was talking about, the January 2020 US-China Economic Agreement, known by many as the Phase 1 deal, the ETA as it was referred to, where I'm going to refer to it as Phase 1. So the Phase 1 deal between the US and China outlined a wide range of IP-related reforms that China promised to pursue, covering the areas of trade secrets, patents, piracy and counterfeiting, trademarks, judicial enforcement, and deterrent-level remedies and penalties. So it really ran the gamut in terms of IP. It's a tremendous scope and ambition. And just to go through a few of the sort of specific commitments that China made in each of these categories, under trade secrets, there was a promise to shift the burden of proof in civil cases to defendants, which was quite important. China committed to new provisions to protect confidentiality. There was a commitment to allow for the initiation of criminal investigations without the plaintiffs having to demonstrate actual losses. So all of these were considered substantive commitments in the area of trade secrets. With respect to patents, there was a commitment to establishing an early resolution mechanism for pharmaceutical patents, approximating patent linkage regimes elsewhere. There was a promise to permit applicants to use supplemental data to meet requirements for patentability. And there was language regarding patent term extension to compensate patent owners for unreasonable delays. In the area of trademarks, China made a commitment to ensuring effective enforcement against bad faith trademark applications. In the area of piracy and counterfeiting, there was promise to ensure expeditious takedowns of counterfeit and pirated goods on e-commerce platforms and to penalize notices and counter notices submitted in bad faith. And then in the area of overall deterrence, across the board, China promised in multiple areas to increase deterrent level civil remedies and criminal penalties. So following the signing of phase one in January 2020, it's, according to my analysis and sort of what we've looked at the chamber, China largely through on the initial and regulatory revisions necessary and committed to begin seriously reforming its IP system at a structural level. And the following list is by no means exhaustive of what China's done in IP over the last year and a half. Last year and a half, China has ended its law, its copyright law, its criminal law. It passed its civil code, which includes punitive damages for intellectual property infringement. The Supreme People's Court of China issued judicial interpretations on the handling of trade secret misappropriation, the treatment of evidence in IP trials, handling of criminal cases for IP infringement, administrative cases involving patent rights, and disputes related to e-commerce platforms as well. The Supreme People's Protectorate and Ministry of Public Security issued regulations on criminal prosecution standards for trade secret misappropriation cases. And the China National Intellectual Property Administration and the National Medical Products Administration have released the measures for implementation of early resolution mechanisms for pharmaceutical patent disputes, which affect earlier this month. Now, I've just kind of gone through a really broad array of IP reforms, and none of these measures, in and of themselves, textually are perfect. There's also certain aspects of China's IP protection system that remain incomplete. And just to go over a few of those areas, in the area of biologics, China's early resolution mechanism for patent disputes do not cover biologics, and that was an explicit phase one commitment that has yet to be fulfilled. China has yet to provide for regulatory data protection for pharmaceuticals. And there have been longstanding issues with judicial transparency in China, with certain cases remaining unpublished and inaccessible to the public. More controversially recently, with respect to China's judicial system, Chinese courts have been claiming jurisdiction to set global patent rates and have made creative use of the essential facilities doctrine to pressure foreign companies to abandon litigation abroad and hand over their patented IP and technology at comparatively low rates. And kind of in that similar vein, China's recently announced law on countering foreign sanctions, which has attracted a lot of media attention, and it hasn't been used yet. But it also threatens to punish foreign companies, prevent them from complying with the export control policies of their home governments. In this respect, there are some in the China IP watching community who would argue that the actions of Chinese courts and potentially forthcoming actions under the law on countering foreign sanctions, if used to pressure foreign companies, could constitute a form of forced technology transfer, which is explicitly prohibited in the phase one agreement and in China's foreign investment law. But of course, these issues are very complex, and they reflect both longstanding trouble spots in China's IP protection system as diverging views between China and other countries, and how how IP and national security issues should be handled. Additionally, related to IP issues, I should mention that competing approaches to data governance is a critical part of Protect P. Is another issue that went unaddressed by the phase one deal. The approaches of the US, EU, and China to data governance are diverging from one another in many respects, with China and the EU rolling out their own regulatory regimes, while the US continues to lack a comprehensive data privacy law at the federal level. With the recent finalization of China's data security law and the approaching passage of its personal information protection law, we've seen China's government roll out the fundamental elements of a comprehensive data governance system. Meanwhile, the US doesn't have that framework at the federal level, although the Department of Commerce recently finalized an ICT supply chain rule that could block certain Chinese companies from having access to data and even certain types of IP in the US market. So, the convergence of data and national security is going to have real implications for IP. And the stakes are high enough and the issues are controversial enough that it will probably be pretty difficult for the US and China to address the issues if a phase 2 deal ever comes to fruition. All of these controversial subjects and trouble spots aside, it's impossible to deny that over the last year, the scope of China's ambitious reform of its IP laws and regulations, it's really been nothing short of breathtaking. We're still largely waiting to see how new laws and regulations will be enforced. The greater attention being paid to penalties and criminal enforcement, and the shift of burden of proof to defendants in civil cases, and various new requirements for courts and regulators to take steps to protect confidential information. All of these things are promising developments for companies seeking stronger IP protections in the Chinese market. And in this sense, I think there's good potential for considerable upside for foreign companies registering and protecting their IP in China's market. And there's a lot that, frankly, I think the rest of the world will learn as China sets about implementing its structural reforms. And it's important to keep that in mind. So I'll end my remarks here and hand it back over to you, David. But thank you once again for including me in this conversation. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much for that wonderful talk. Are there any questions? I haven't received any questions, but Holly, can you hear me? Are there any questions for the speaker, Mr. Ben Jacob?
David, we haven't, we're still waiting for the questions to be posed. We're moving on. I will present you with the questions later. The one thing I do want to add, David, before you continue to move on, is that this entire program idea was that of Dr. David Boxbaum. It was not my idea. He's the one who analyzed everything together with his firm, Anderson and Anderson, very capable law firm. And he actually told me what to do, and I'm happy to have followed these instructions. And that's why we have such great, very successful program today. Thank you, David. It's all yours, please.
Holly, you're much too polite and much too modest. Holly, you're much too polite and much too modest. You're the one who organized this wonderful seminar. Let me introduce my next speaker, Ms. Zhang. Zhang is an IP specialist. She's a patent agent and will soon get her law license. She's been active in IP work since 2014. She's done patent, trademark, and copyright registrations. She has provided legal advice and participated in litigation. And she's an integral part of our Anderson team. She's the head of our IP division for all the offices in our firm. And she will talk about the various international agreements that I'll describe. Ms. Zhang, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's my great honor to be here. As Mr. Jericho has introduced the IPR reforms of the ETA and some of the changes happened last year in China, he shared with us his observation and opinions on intellectual property patent in China, which is primarily a law. As Mr. Danko will introduce the CAI later, I will focus on other two trade agreements, CTP and RCEP, comparing their intellectual property sections. First of all, please allow me to introduce our firm, Anderson & Anderson. Anderson is a law firm with more than 15 years experience in intellectual property, office in New York, Ulaanbaatar, and Mongolia, Hong Kong, Guangzhou, and Shanghai, and affiliate elsewhere. We have been having our clients in the United States, Greater China, Mongolia, India, Israel, and other jurisdictions to maximize their intellectual property, protect where makes them unique. We assist our clients overcome every challenge of the way to the market by strategical defending and enforcing their intangible and invaluable assets. Cooperating with AmCham, Anderson published an analysis of intellectual property section of the international trade agreement and bilateral trade agreements, which are EPA, CAI, and RCEP, and the CPTPP. CPTPP was signed by 11 countries in 2018, including Japan, Australia, Chile, New Zealand, Singapore, Brunei, Malaysia, Vietnam, Mexico, and Peru, after the withdrawal of the US. So far, several countries has ratified agreements. According to the CPTPP, the agreement became effective on the approval of more than 6 countries. The total economic weight of the CPTPP member states accounts for 500 million consumers and 30.5% of the global economic aggregate. Increased 40% where US participate in the negotiations. The RCEP was signed by 3 countries in 2020, including 10 member states of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, Australia, China, Japan, South Korea, and New Zealand. So far, China, Thailand, and Japan has internal ratified agreement, while other member countries indicate that they will approve by 2021, which may make the RCEP effective on 1st January 2022. RCEP is the world's largest free trade agreement, covering a population of over 3.5 billion, meaning 47.4% of the world's population. The gross domestic product of GDP of the member states accounts for 32.2% of the world GDP, and their foreign trade amount accounts for 29.1% of the world's total foreign trade. The conclusion of RCEP symbolizes the establishment of the world's largest free region. The intellectual property section of the CPTPP aims to promote technology innovations, technology transfer, and communication. To help inventors and their game to end game. Promoting and liberalization and IP service trade. RCEP will promote economic integration and cooperation through the effective and creation, utilization, protection, and enforcement of the intellectual property rights to reduce distortion of and impediments to trade and investment. Therefore, we can see that the purpose of the intellectual property section of CPTPP is completely different from the RCEP. Considering the parties' different levels of the economic development and capacity, as well as differences in national legal system, RCEP is seeking a balance between the rights of the rights holder and the legitimate rights and interests of the IP users. RCEP requires each party to join a universal system within the framework of the WIPO. Beyond RCEP, CPTPP requires each parties enhance IPR further on the basis of the world intellectual property system. The intellectual property rule in CPTPP generally represent the development directions toward higher standards and improve traditional intellectual property protection. Significant protection standard is that protection measures refine protection rules and provide strict law enforcement procedures and legal responsibility. Here, I will separate into 3 aspects to the difference between CEP and the CPTPP. The first one is trademark. CPTPP involves a broader scope of intellectual property protection of trademark. For example, CPTPP protects the subject matters including non-traditional trademark types, such as some and older trademark. The subject matters protected by the trademark provided in CPTPP and the RCEP are basically the same as TRIPS Article 15. However, the types of the signs which is registrable and as trademark are set forth in CPTPP further break through the regulations of TRIPS. By removing the requirement of being visual, acceptable of trademark registration and adding older as a matter protected by the trademark law. CPTPP also specify that geographical indications should respect the rules of pre-existing trademarks and protect a pre-existing trademarks to which the rights has been acquired, or a pre-existing good faith pending application or registration. CPTPP's intellectual property protects relates to the patents is more specific, precise. In CPTPP, the procedural systems that in most patent protections has been constantly refined, such as supplementing patent protections measures related to patent terms and agrochemicals. CPTPP requires if there is any unreasonable delays in processing patent application, a party should provide the means or of the request of the patent owner shall adjust the terms of the patent to compensate for such delays. Explanation should be further provided for the unreasonable delays that at least shall include a delay in the issuance of patent of more than 5 years from the date of the filing of the application in the territory of the party. 3 years after 3 years after a request for examination of the application has been made. While is later, such requirement is not made in the RCEP. CPTPP sets separate chapters for agricultural chemicals product and pharmaceutical product, while RCEP does not contain clause on either of the products. CPTPP requires protection for undisclosed and other data for agricultural chemical products. By specifying the submission of the undisclosed tags or other data concerning the safety and efficacy of the product as the condition of marketing, and prohibiting any third persons without the consent to market to the same of the similar product on the basis of the information on marketing approval granted to the person that submitted such tags or data for at least 10 years on the marketing approval of such agricultural chemical products. As for the pharmaceutical products, CPTPP provides that each party shall ensure that undisclosed tags or other data concerning the safety and efficacy of the pharmaceutical products submitted to the marketing approval shall be protecting and for at least 5 years. However, ETA does not provide protection terms or disclose tags or other data concerning the safety and efficacy of the pharmaceutical products for the marketing approval. As for the CPTPP provides the times the time of first publication by a performer or by producer of the photograph. Namely, a performance of photograph shall be considered that published in the territory of the party. It is published in the territory of the party with 15 days of the original publication. The rights of a performer and the producer of the photograph are issues of the adjacent right. However, such issues are provided in the RCEP or the Berne Convention. CPTPP provides that the author, performer, and producer of the photograph has the right to authorize or prohibit the reproduction of their works. First, performance in photographs in any forms or manner. CPTPP further provides that a first word of performance and photograph are not protected by copyright or any related rights. However, CPTPP, if performance excludes rights to authorize or prohibit the broadcasting or communication to public of its unfixed performance, RCEP does not specify any of the step 2 regulation and set forth in the CPTPP. CPTPP states that with respect to the term of protection of works, performance, and photograph, if the right holder is a natural person, the term will not be less than 70 years after its stamp. It's standing for the 50 years is standing for the 50 years pursuant to the Berne Convention. If it is a legal person, the term shall be 70 years after first publication is standing for 50 years pursuant to the Berne Convention. The terms of protection of copyright and the related rights has been extending 20 years. Moreover, CPTPP provides strict IP enforcement measures in terms of civil committees. CPTPP has raised the standard of civil damage for copyright trademark rights, identifying terms of infringing groups restricted by the border measures. The border measures will be enforced not only on import and export, but also on transit of the goods. Furthermore, it lowered the requirement for applications of criminal procedures and penalties on intellectual property infringement. For the comparison of the RCEP and CPTPP, I found that the CPTPP of intellectual property rules have higher standards than those of the RCEP. China is preparing to join the CPTPP on the 14th 5-year plan of commerce development. The Ministry of Commerce in China reveals that they will reviewing, studying, and analyzing all the articles communicating and sharing false concern issues in the formal content. China expressed a strong willingness to join the CPTPP after its participation on the RCEP. If China joined the CPTPP successfully, the intellectual property protection in China will improve further. Therefore, I expect that China will participate in the CPTPP so high-level intellectual property actions can help the China build up a much better intellectual property legal systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chang. That was very interesting. And before I go on, the next distinguished speaker, I'd like to say a few words. As Mr. Ben Jacobs and Ms. Chang pointed out, the developments of protection of IP in China in the past year have been very substantial and very important. The laws have progressed enormously. Regulations also. What hasn't changed to some extent is some of the institutions that are enforcing the intellectual property. For example, the court system. Now, the court system is certainly improved. However, there's still the long-term problem with the judicial system has have yet to be addressed. For example, the law of evidence in China is not, it's very incomplete. The Code of Civil Procedure and the rules from the people's Supreme Court, People's Supreme Court, there are no other important rules of evidence. And the world rules of evidence. Secondly, Chinese courts still demean oral evidence. Oral evidence is very, very important. And it's a very important source of evidence. And testimony of witnesses is very, very important. And therefore, the Chinese judiciary recognizes this. However, one of the problems with testimony in civil proceedings in China is that there's no law of perjury related to civil proceedings, to civil proceedings. And they can be. There are criminal proceedings, but there are civil proceedings. So that's another problem. A third problem is this idea that evidence that can be notarized and legalized and consularized overseas. And that is a unnecessary burden on the foreign litigants. Then. And that's something that should be done away with a long, long time ago. The notary system, for example, in the United States and the notary system in China is a completely different system. The notary in the United States only notarizes the fact that the signatory paid for it. They don't notarize anything about the document. In China, a notary has the ability to do much more than that based on the notarial system. So that is an additional problem with the court system. Furthermore, the students in law schools, and they have wonderful law schools in China, are not trained in examination, course examination of witnesses. And this is that should be cured, and it's cured easily. So these are some institutional problems with the court system, and finally, more independence given to the three judges in most cases, or one judge and two justices in some cases, adjudicate case. It must be given an independence and not be bound by the adjudication committee or other committees within the court controlling their independence. I think it would be very important not only to look at see how China can reform the practice of the system and the administrative tribunals that have been foresight to meet the tremendous strides it's made in enacting laws and regulations. I would now like to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Mr. Joseph. Thank one in Germany and graduated and the industrial engineer. He had a position, I'm sorry, in Siemens healthcare headquarters until the late 80s. From 1993 to 2006, he was based in Hong Kong. Later made several executive management positions within the Siemens healthcare organization. One of the executive director is SMR. He's in Shenzhen's high. In 2006, startup and developed from scratch the Shenzhen subsidiary of a Swiss company, Medico AG. Medico is a global player involved in the healthcare industry, manufacturing MRI shielding solutions for hospitals and research institutions. Mr. Zinko will talk about the EU-China investment agreement, draft investment agreement. Mr. Zinko.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much. Good evening to some of our participants here from the United States. Thank you, David, for your introduction, and I'm honored to speak here. So I would also not miss to happy birthdays to Harley, and we always have a good communication and teamwork together. So I'm thanking him who actually introduced me to participate in this seminar. So, well, thank you for having me. Yes, I am with the European Chamber of Commerce in China. I'm the vice president, and I am the chairman of the South China board. So I am familiar with the South China business, mainly, of course, Guangdong province, but we also have activities in Fujian and Hainan. And the company I am the Medco Swiss company, so I'm also in the board of director at the Swiss Chamber. So, and I'm from Germany, so I'm a member in Germany as well. So I'm with 3 chambers, and we have a good picture of what's happening in the about it. Let me give you some information on the EU Chamber of Commerce in China. It's a non-profit organization, and it was founded in the year 2000, and the last year we had the 20 years anniversary. And at the moment we have 1,700 okay, 1,700 members. Next slide, please. Next. Okay, the headquarters office is in Beijing, and we have local chapters in Shanghai, Shenyang, Tianjin, Nanjing, the southwest, represented in Chengdu and in Chongqing, and in the south we have 2 offices in Guangzhou and in Shenzhen. So our ABC, so-called this advocacy, means we meet a lot, we do a lot of lobbying with the government, in the city government, the provincial governments. Business intelligence, we do surveys every year, like the business confidence survey. How do the European enterprises feel in China? And we also publish a position paper and other magazines on a quarterly basis. Community is a very important part of our work. We do a lot of networking, and we organize companies that members can share their experience. Next slide, please. So the South chapter was established in 2006 in Guangzhou and 2007 in Shenzhen. We have about 270 members, companies from 25 countries, and 68% is multinational companies, and we have also quite small and medium-sized enterprises. 32%. We are doing a lot of events per year. So last has started a lot of online events like we're doing it today because of the pandemic situation. Next one, please. Just a quick introduction. IMEDCO is doing RF shielding, and we heard the Faraday company. Actually, we are building Faraday cages, which is of benefit for scientists and doctors. When the scientists do some research work, we can give them a good basis, and the doctors in the hospital when they operate the MRI. So we have the facility in Switzerland, in China, and in the United States. Next one, please. A quick look. This is our art, and we are doing wonderful things for the scientists in the universities and hospitals in China and in Asia, produced in Shenzhen. So we have a big project now in Harbin with the Harbin Institute of Technology, and we are working closely together with them. This will be the world biggest magnetically shielded room in the world. So next one, please. Let's talk about the CAI, the Comprehensive Agreement of Investment. Is a proposed deal between the Republic of China and the EU. It was started negotiation in 2014, so it took 7 years until 2020. It was announced that an investment deal was reached and referred to as the CAI, and but the ratification was pending at that time. So the CAI meaningfully improves market access, equal treatment, sustainability interests, and certainly also looks and covers into the IPR protection. So this is also part of the CIA. I cannot go into the details now. I will give you an overview. If you have questions later, we can talk about it. The deal is the most ambitious agreement that China ever concluded by significantly opening its internal market to EU companies. I hope it will not only open to EU companies, to all the companies in the world from different countries. Next, please. So due to some unfortunate political developments, I was appointed in March 2021. It was reported that there would be serious doubts about the approval of the deal. And then the European Parliament in May this year decided to postpone ratification of the CAI. Basically, it's so-called frozen. So it is not clear what will happen. Anyway, Chinese officials say, the Chinese side say that many times that the CAA is a balanced win-win. It's not a gift from one party to the other. It is one that serves the interest of both. Chinese top leading officials are offered the insight how to manage the comprehensive strategic partnership between China and the EU, both opportunities and challenges, but it's against politicizing these trade issues. Next, please. So the CIA is frozen, and they are not clear when it will be really ratified and implemented. We only hope it will not take another 7 years. Anyway, the European Chamber did a survey, business confidence survey in 2021. And it shows that despite this increased politicization of economic issue, the EU business are deepening their exposure to the Chinese market. 59% of the respondents, they plan to expand their current operation in China. Only 9% move to other markets. Those are maybe which really look into intensive labor costs, so they may move out to other countries. But the majority is really trying to expand their current operations here. This marks one of the most optimistic outlooks, investment outlooks since 2014. And the the tensions on the political stage seem to have not a big impact on the investment decisions. So European businesses are still confident to remain in China and to stay in China. So the next slide, please. So for the foreign investment actually increased in 2021. If you compare on year with 2020, the first quarter was up by 16.8% in the first 5 months, not only the first quarter. So I think if the investment continue to expand over the coming months, it will be a clear sign that the companies judge the economic opportunities are bigger and greater than political risk. So companies remain buoyant about Chinese prospects as it emerges from the pandemic. It is ahead of the rest of the world. So investments also reflect ongoing shift towards increased localization of operation service the Chinese market. So in China, for China is one of the big slogans. So that is a basis for this step is there. At least I can speak from it in the south. Can you, the next slide, please? So we have opportunities as an example for the EU businesses in the south of China. The Greater Bay Area is the most business-friendly place in China, as demonstrated by the fact that Guangdong is drawing a lot of big investments. And for example, the city of Shenzhen is doing a lot for IPR protection. They have invested a few hundred million of RMB to support the IPR protection. So they're doing something, and which also creates a confidence among the foreign investment, foreign companies. So they are hoping, the enterprise is hoping to work with the Guangdong province during the 14th five-year plan in the high-tech area. So the foreign investment companies, EU and also US, they're contributing a lot to the GDP, and they need to be assured to get equal access to the GPA. So in general, the European business leaders feel confident about the operations in Guangdong. So there's opportunities. If you look to the technologies like the decarbonization, will have opportunities in the future. Green manufacturing is a top issue, and new energies, robotics, healthcare, all of those bear a lot of opportunities where EU businesses, American businesses have great experience and great knowledge and can be a contributor to this part of the world, to develop the world in a cleaner way and to have a brighter future. Next slide, please, which is, yeah. So we always give recommendations to the government, and here in particular to the Guangdong government, develop human resource to become a center for talent. This is very important if you want to be a player like in this GBA for innovation. You need to have the talents not only coming from the local, from China, different part of China, but also from different part of the world. And then this is a guarantee for a high innovation output. And at the moment, we have still another issue is how to bring in the people short term because of the border closing due to the pandemic. So there we are discussing with the government, but I think there's no short-term solution for this. And develop the world-class regulatory environment within the GBA. That means, of course, including the IPR. That is one request we always mention when we give recommendation and when we meet with the government officials. Tax benefits, also including the IIT reform, how to handle this tax burden, which will be implemented next year, and grant some subsidies. In the GBA, they will do some special subsidies. The other one is just I think the infrastructure issue. If you want to be global player, you better have a stable power grid and avoid brownouts, scheduled shutdowns. Ask the companies to shut down their operations for 1 or 2 days a week is not a healthy way to do this. But this is also based on the transition from fossil fuel to renewable fuels. Next slide, please. And yeah, also the CIA has a little bit slowed down. EU businesses are in China for China, and the middle class, as we heard also before, will grow, and there's a lot of things to come, and the strong purchasing power will also be increased in the Chinese society. So it's a bright future in general, but look and do all the chambers like the European Chamber, American Chamber need to do their work and continue lobbying with the governments. That's all I want to talk to you today in my presentation. Thank you very much. And if you have questions, please don't hesitate. Let me answer your questions. Thank you very much. David, you are muted. Can you please unmute yourself?
Okay.
David, yeah, okay.
Are there any
Thank you.
questions now?
David, there's a question for Klaus, and we do need to ask at least one question from our dear friend Ben Jacobs that we didn't ask, and then after that we need to sign off. We're actually pretty much on time with the seminar. The question for Klaus, the negotiation on the comprehensive agreement on investment between China and the European Union are currently suspended. Is it possible to continue negotiations? What are the conditions required for both sides would like to continue to start renegotiation?
Yeah, that's I briefly mentioned in my presentation that this is unfortunate that it has been postponed, and this is due to both sides sanctions. The European put some sanctions, the Chinese side put some sanctions, and this is all happening on the political stage. European businesses say we want to do business. We do not want to politicize this issue. We want to contribute to the business development between Europe and our business partner in China. And we hope we can continue our work even without that CIA ratified. And because now at this point, nobody understands when this will be. The European says it will only be continued when China lifts the sanctions. So that's a game which both sides will stay tough for some time. We don't know how long, but EU business and China business are eager to work together, and I think we can still achieve a lot when we have the same thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Klaus. Very, very articulate presentation. We thank you very much for joining us. It's an honor to be partner with your European Chamber, and we look forward to working with you going forward very closely. There's a question for Mr. Ben Jacobs. Ben, one of the audience is asking, they comment that China has made great strides in IPR. What is your optimism going forward? And if you were to point to just one single issue that you expect China, you hope China would address, what would it be?
That's a very good question. I'm optimistic on China's IP reforms, primarily because actually enforcing and implementing these reforms is in China's interest. You have Chinese companies that are also dealing with their own products being counterfeited, and they're dealing with piracy, and they want to expand abroad as well. And so it's in China's interest to create a robust IP protection system, and that goes right along with all of the parties' goals about sort of boosting innovation within the Chinese economy. You need to provide incentives for innovation and create that ecosystem in order for it to occur. And I think that China's IP reforms, for the most part, really get at that core question. As I mentioned in my presentation, there are exceptions when it comes to certain sort of national security critical areas, like 5G patents, for example. But overall, I am optimistic that the reforms that have been rolled out over the last year and a half will in time strengthen IP protections in China for most companies and in most sectors across the board. In terms of which sort of where I would hope for the most improvement, if that was the question, and correct me if I'm not answering the right question. I would hope to see more judicial transparency. It would be really helpful to have the decisions and the kind of rationale that judges in China and courts are citing and rendering verdicts based on, to subject that to public scrutiny, because I think that would help not only in terms of judicial transparency and sort of holding courts' feet to the fire in that sense, but also it would help courts learn from one another and judges learn from one another and the rest of the world learn from how China is dealing with IP. And I think that would be systemically beneficial if there were more transparency in that regard.
Thank you. I think that's an excellent answer, and I'm sure powers to be in China are listening and they will follow on your advice and take it into consideration. David, I'm going to turn this over to you and let you do the closing comments and closing session. I thank everyone for your fabulous support and participation today. David, it's all yours.
Well, thank you all very much for your participation. We certainly appreciate the excellent presentations you've made. Very important issues on trade and intellectual property, both of which, of course, are intimately related. And I think that the express willingness of both China and the United States and the Europeans to go forward with trade and trade agreements bodes well for the future. Despite the hostility that overtly exists now, there is still a positive backdrop of trade that is going forward, and China is certainly, as has been expressed, improving its intellectual property protection dramatically for its own, as Mr. Van Jacob just said, primarily out of its own self-interest. So thank you all very much. Thank particularly Harley for organizing this seminar and for all the great work he did in putting it together. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Bless you all. Have a great day. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Happy
Oh.
birthday.
Bye, Ali. Take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Happy birthday.
Oh.
Thank you, Harley.
They give me flowers. Thank you all. Love you. Thank you. Thank you. Have a great team here. You all take care. Bye-bye.